Hello. So today we are going to continue from where we left off last time. And so what I want to implement today on this login screen. So in the last video we implemented the UI for it, the title, the two fields, sign-in button. But right now what I want to implement is validation with Compose. So if you input something wrong, let's say this is not a valid email, we want to make the field underline red, and we want to also display the error message under the input field. And we want to do a similar thing for password, except if and allow only like 4 characters, at least 4 characters. So if you input 3, we should display an error saying the password is invalid, and we should also show an underlying error similar to the email, an underlying like red line similar to the email address. For email address, we will allow only something that has some text, @, and then some other text. So this is what we are going to try to do. And the third thing is to also disable signing button until the 2 fields have valid content. So as long as the 2 fields are not valid or are not filled yet, we want to keep the signing button disabled, which makes sense because when you click let's say when you click with this invalid, we shouldn't allow you to sign in, and so there is no use in enabling the button. Okay, so this is what we are going to try to achieve, so let's get started. So the first thing, we have our sign-in screen so far. Just a reminder, we built the 4 composables so far, a title, an email field, a password field, and a signing button composable. So this is what we have so far. And so first, let's start with just adding the validation to the email. And so what we want to do is be able to, whenever the content of the field changes, we want to validate. So what that would mean is that when the value changes, we're going to do something called validate. And then the text field has this error property where we can say true or false, right? But we need this to be based on whether the content is valid or not, right? So it kind of needs to be based on the state. And so what I'm going to do here is create a custom object to hold the state of the email, because we want to hold multiple things, the text, but we will also want to hold whether the current content has an error or not, so that we can assign it here, right? So that's what we are going to try to do. And so let's start creating that. So here, let's say, just because we are going, here is error is going to be used for both email and password. We can use the same mechanism. We will just need to have 2 classes that implements it, one for email and one for password, because the validation function would be different for each, and the error message also would be different for each. So we can put the common code in a class and then extend it for both email and password. So that's what we are going to do here. So let's create our structure. So we'd have email state. We need password state. We'll implement this one later. And then we need the parent that will have the main logic. Just because it's very similar between the 2, we don't need to create it for each. So let's call it text field state. So since we want to extend it, we need to make it open here. And so email state will need to extend it. Similar thing for password state. Now what do we need? We need the email to provide its validation function and the password to provide its validation function. For email, it's going to be different. We are going to look for some text and then @ and then some other text. For password, we are just going to look at the length and make sure it's bigger or equal to 4. And so we need to be able to customize by the validation function. And so let's make this take as as a property here the validator function, and the validator will get passed the content here, and so that's just a string, and it should return whether it's valid or not, Boolean. And what about initially, like when the text is empty, what do we want before you input anything? Well, at that point we want true by default, right? Because it's not, you haven't input anything else, so we don't want to do anything. The other thing is, what I want to display is if you put like a wrong email, we want to display and say to you like invalid email. And if you put in invalid password, we want to say invalid passwords, a message like that. And so it is going to be custom as well. And so what this would mean here is that we would need an error message function that we can customize for each one of them. Okay. To be able to just focus on email for now, let's just comment the password one. Now what we want is for the email state, we want to pass these two parameters, right? What is the validator? And then we want to pass what is the error message. Okay, and so let's write these up. So our validator is going to be, we need to write a function that checks if the email is valid. And so that would be, we need to pass an email string and just return a Boolean. And then here we can use actually just regular expression and just match against a pattern that will give us some text, and then @, and then some other text. This is what we want to look for. And so let's write our function, constant for the pattern, so email validation regular expression. And that would be, we wanted to start with anything. It can be a number, it can be anything, but it can be empty, right? We can't just start with @. So that's why we are doing that plus instead of that star. And then we want @ and we want it to end with something as well. So we want a similar thing at the end here. So that would be a plus. And then this should be the end. Okay. And now we can just pattern match against that. So this would be email validation. And then we need to pass the email. And that should validate for us. Now, our validator here is going to get passed an email. And we just need to call this on it. But this actually can be simplified, right? Because we just pass the parameter here as input to the function. So we can just, instead of doing this, we can just do this simpler syntax and omit the explicit parameter and passing it. So the second thing is the error message. What should be the error message? So let's say email error message is going to be, so this is a function. It gets passed an email as well. And we want to return a string. So let's just say email and put the email that we put is invalid, right? That should be enough. And here we can do a similar thing, but we can just, since we are passing the only parameter that we have in the lambda to the function, we can just do this as well. And we don't need anything in the body, so that's our email state. Now we need to use this, right, in the sign-in screen. So if we, in the email composable, so here instead of using just a mutable text field, we can use email state. Because mutable state actually is just, it can be passed any value, right? So value is t. It can be passed any value. What's important is that that value needs to have an observable, something that can be observed. And so for our case here, this needs to be the value, the text, right? but in the current text field we have nothing. So we need to add it there. So what we want is the current input text to be observable, so that if it changes, the composable can update using it. And so let's just make it here. So mutable state, of course, so that it can be observed. And initially it's empty. For byte to work, we need to import two things. Android x.compose, runtime, get value, and we need set value as well. Let's get rid of this. And now we are making it var because we want to assign to it when the value changes. And so here now we can just say that text, this is the value. And here we want to update text. And this is the email state. So here we shouldn't have mutable state of email state, right? This doesn't work. We already have the email state, the mutable state, as a property for a text. So what we should have here is just email state here as the remember by, and now we should be able to say text and assign the text when the value changes. Yeah, remember this, like you can pass any object here, but what you need to have is something that can be observed so that the composable can update when it changes. Okay, so now that we have this, we can use it now for the error. So we can say is error. What should we put here? That's the problem here. What should we put? But first, before doing anything, let's just make sure our for doing that, let's make sure our email still is valid. Like when we input text, it still gets displayed in the text field, just to make sure we didn't mess up anything. Expecting the top level. Okay, so we have the class. Okay. Oh, this is a function. I forgot the function keyword here. Okay. Okay, let's test this out. Okay, so everything is still working on that side. Now we just need to get the error to get displayed. And to get the error to be displayed, the error indicator, as we said, we need is error here to have a value. But we need to know, we need something to observe here if there is an error. And we need to also call a function to validate the content of the text. And so let's write that out. So we need a function here to validate the content. And so we need another function to, so we need just to check if we can use our validator. If the text is valid, then we can, there is no error, so nil for the error. I will create a variable for the error here. Otherwise, we can call error message to get the error text. And so that would be just error message and pass in the email. Okay. The other thing is, what should be this error here? We can definitely like say, okay, let's make it private, let's make it val, let's make it an error, and let's make it a string. So that can be the first step here. That will work. But if we go here, we can take the email state and check if we want to check if the error is null or not. at this point. But we want this variable to update whenever the error state changes. Like, let's say I had test at like this, and then I changed it and now it's valid. I want this error to be automatically updated so that the underlying error indicator is no longer displayed. What this tells me is that I need it to be an observable thing, similar to the text. And so what this would mean here is that I need to make this a mutable string, mutable state of. So that will be by, and it needs to be a var at this point because we want to update it. And so mutable state of, since the error can be null if the text is valid, so we need it to be a string, an optional string. And we can initialize it with null because initially there is no error. And now we need to expose it as well for the error to see it. And so what this would mean here is we can just check if the error is not null. That means we need to display an error indicator. Okay, so we have that. The second thing is that we want to validate it. Like right now, this function is not called, so the error never gets updated. And so we want to call that. When do we want to call it? Whenever you input something, we want to check, right? And so what this would mean is that whenever the value changes, we want to check. And so here we can do email state dot validate. And this should hopefully work. Let's try it. Okay, so now we have our email text. So let's see. So now you can see it displays the error indicator red on this email address and on the underlying line here. This is provided by the text field itself. Whenever its error is true, it changes its styles. Now if I add at, it's still not valid, but if I add the second text, now it's valid according to our regex here. And so it gets valid. Now the second thing we need to do is we need to display the error text, right, that we implemented here with this message, email is invalid. So how can we do that? What we can do is just display another text under this title. And so let's make this a column. Let's put this up. And then here, if there is an error, we want to display an error field, right? Just a text field that has the color red, right? And so to do that, we can just take the state and error and just do a let here so that only if the error is not null, we will have this error field. And just display the error field. This is what's nice about this email state is that it's reactive, and so whenever we have an error, this field will pop up. It will get displayed. And so we want to pass the error text, of course, and so let's pass it in. And now we need to define a composable for this, right? And so this would be error field, and it needs a text. So that would be error string. And what we need to define here is just a text field. A text is going to be the error. We need it to fill max width. And we need the color to be red. And so to do that, let's just have a text style and have the color be the error color. That whatever the theme says is the error color we want to use. In our case here, that would be red. So there is this error field that gives us the error color. And that should be it. And so let's see if this would work. Okay, so if I do test here, you can see email test is invalid. And then I say at still invalid, but here the underlying error got displayed, and the style, the error style on the input field also was removed. So it's working for email, that's great. Now let's do a similar thing for password. And so pretty much very similar, we just need to define it. So we have our password state class here. We need to do something similar to what we did for the email state. So we need to provide a validator and then an error message. And so let's do that. So we need two things: a validator, and our validator is going to be just is password valid. It's going to be passing the password as well. So that will be is password valid. We are going to get past the password, which is a string, and then I'll return a boolean. And then here we can just check if password length is at least 4. And we can move this into we can actually just make this equal. Okay. And then the second thing is we want to provide the error message. So that will be for our case here, that can be just password error message, and can be just equal to password is invalid. We don't want to display the password unlike the email. And then we can use that here. So this would be, we can just do the syntax here because we're not passing the string. So this would be password error message. Okay. Sorry, we need to apply this now, this state, like we did with the email state. And so what this would mean is we need to go to our password composable and replace this with password state, right? Similar to what we did with the email. Okay, and now we can use the same thing we did for the email. This is the nice thing that we have because we made it generate. We made text field state here as the base class. And now we want to validate here like we did with the email. So password state.validate. And we want to display the error. So this would be is error only if password state has an error. And the second thing is display. We can use the same text error field that we used here. And so if there is an error like this, we just to add error field and pass in the error text. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, looks like there is a problem with, yeah, the assignment here. Okay. Okay, so now let's try to to see if this worked. So it's still working for email. So for password, if we just put 2 or just 1 letter, it's invalid. If we do 3, still invalid. 4, it's valid, and now the error text is removed. So if we remove, again, it becomes invalid, and then once we add it up, it is valid again. So it is working, and let's just make sure that this one is working as well. Okay, so this one is working. Okay, so now what we want to do is disable the button. And so if there is, if the 2 are invalid. But to be able to disable the button, we need to pass here to the sign in button. We need to have enabled pass it here, right? And so we need enabled, pass it as a parameter to the button, and there is this enabled field that will give it a style disabled if it's if it's false, and style enabled if it's true. Should control the enabled state of the button. So when false, this button will not be clickable. So the onClick listener will not be called, which is what we want. And so we need a way to check if both are valid. We need to set this true. If one of them is invalid, we want to pass false. To be able to do that, we need access to the email state and the password state here, so that we can call a function that checks if there is an error or not, right? But here we can actually, we need also a function that we can call directly to know at that moment what is the state. And so we can just like move this here and call is valid here. And we can just check email state is valid and password state is valid to determine if the button should be enabled. But for that to happen, we need to do something called state hoisting, which is we need the state to not be internal to the composable. Right now our composable is stateful. So we need this to be passed in as a parameter. And so what we can do is move this out here for the email. Let's do it first for the email. And so we pass to the email the text, and then when it changes, we can pass, we can just do email state.text equal to it. What this would mean is that this function here is going to have the email text, and then on email changed, which is going to be past the string and the unit. And what this would mean is here we need to pass in an email, and here we can do on email changed and pass in the function, and this can be just this, and we need to call validate outside of this. And so what this would mean here is we need to call validate here. The other thing is we need the error, right? So we need to pass the error as well. So let's call this error, which is going to be a string. And so we can do error and similar thing here. Okay. And then here we can pass in the error, which is just email state. Okay, cool. Okay, so now that we have this, for the email, we need to do a similar thing for the password. But first, let's just make sure it's working for email before implementing it for password. And here, temporarily, we'll just pass enabled equal to true. What we are making sure of here is that email state logic for validation is still working fine without issues. And then from there, we can do the same thing for the password. Okay, so now let's see if it's still working. So we have the email is what we are looking for. So it's still validating correctly. If I do add, the error gets removed. So it's still working fine, cool. Now what this would mean is we can do the same similar thing for password. And so we need this to move. We need password state to move up to the parent composable. And we need to pass the password state, the error, and we can do password state.text, and we can validate it. So here we need to have a password string. We can leave the show password. This can be internal. We don't need it to be up. And then error can be a string, and then we need on password changed, which is going to be a string, lambda string to unit. And then here we can just use password for the value. You can use this can be on password changed. And just to be consistent with the naming here, let's just put here it. And then once we have this, we need the same similar thing to change here in the error and here, and we should be good there. Let's test it out, make sure it's still working for password. And then from there we can start enabling, disabling the button if both are if one of them is invalid. Okay, so now that it's running, let's check to see if password logic is still working. So now it's invalid, so the error showed up, still invalid, and with 4 characters it's valid. So that's working. Now we just need to use this check if both are valid, and only in that case enable the button. So if this is valid and password is valid, only if both are valid that we enable the button. Let's make sure this is working. Okay, so now the button initially is invalid. It's disabled, so that's good. Password is invalid, so it's still disabled. Email is invalid, password is valid, both invalid, so it's still disabled. Once password is enabled, it's still disabled, and then once we enable the email, it gets disabled. So only if both are valid. If the password is no longer valid, it no longer works, and it's back up once it's valid. So this works. Okay, so yeah, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next one. Bye.